where is a hotspot?
All right, I think we can get started.
Wi-Fi. I know, but if you're listening, my husband said the same thing. Why are they turning about hotspot?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order on October 31st, 2018. Ariana, roll call, please.
Commissioner Bixson did excuse herself from today's meeting. Sid Craig. Commissioner Gazan.
Here.
Chair Gazan. Commissioner Gray.
Here.
Commissioner Hammond.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Marshall. Here. Commissioner Williams. Here. We have a quorum.
All right. Commissioner Gray, I'm going to have you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Do we have a motion to accept today's agenda?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our September 26th meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second. Can I second? Yeah. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
And opposed? Okay. This is the time for public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Measure J Commission on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Although the Measure J Commission values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action or items not listed on the posted agenda. You will have 3 minutes for each speaker. Do we have anyone from the public? Okay. Well, welcome everybody and happy Halloween. And once again, thank you for juggling schedules that we're having a meeting on our off date here. Just a few quick items. If you got an email from Monique from staff, please make sure that you take that ethics class that's offered online. You click on the link and it does take a minimum of 2 hours. So if you haven't done that, that is due by December, and I know that seems like a while away, but time is ticking. It's holidays, we get busy, and it is a bit of a time chunk. You want to make sure that you do it all in one sitting, because it made me nervous that if you kind of, I don't know if you can.
You can leave.
You can leave?
You can leave.
Okay.
Yeah, you can be comfortable with that. Do it for whatever you're comfortable with and then go back.
Okay.
Already done.
All right, great. I do realize that the materials related to the projects update that we're going to be going over today were not sent in advance, so I expect that this topic might carry over into our November meeting, which is only in 2 weeks. So even though we didn't have a chance to really look at it, we can kind of delve into that today, and I'm sure this will be something that will carry over. Also, due to some miscommunication, there was an omission of new business item, and that was the subject of appointing a liaison between our commission and the library subcommittee. And I've talked to Ariana. We would like to add that item to next month's agenda, which again is in 2 weeks. And we will, it should 2 weeks, the 15th?
No, it's November 20th, isn't it?
Third Thursday.
Is it the third Thursday? Is it November 20th?
15th.
The 15th.
Well,
Yeah, because
Mr. Chair,
November.
I'd suggest that as a tool that you may not be aware that you have, but as chairman, you can actually just go ahead and appoint a subcommittee. I offer that to you as a possibility if you care to use it.
Okay, all right, excellent.
You gave me that kind of
I don't know if I want that power, but, all right.
Did you say it's not on the agenda? It is on the agenda.
On this agenda, we have to city council,
Oh,
a liaison to city council, but not to the library.
oh, sorry.
So we'll definitely cover that on the November 15th meeting at 4 PM. And finally, for the first time this,
Excuse me, but November, oh, wait a minute. No, it's, okay.
yeah,
Okay,
because
so
I think
it's
the
from-
first happens on a Thursday, that's why. Or, yeah, which is tomorrow. And that will be our first regular scheduled meeting for the year. And also at that meeting, we can decide whether we want to have a December meeting. So just think about that. We're not going to vote on it today. We'll just kind of see where we're at with all these reportings. And if we want to have a meeting in December, again, it is close to Christmas. And that, I believe, is all that I have from my side of things.
Can I just make a comment before you move on?
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
I just am going to comment on the December meeting and the possibility of having or not having, and waiting until November to make a decision, when there may be people around the table who are trying to get transportation to other places for the holiday. And waiting another month for that, or 3 weeks for that, could be challenging. So I would just say, I'd encourage us to have it on the agenda today.
Can I also say that we have 4 people leaving, and that would be their last meeting, and I think it would be good to at least meet quickly to see if there's any final things that we should know about, rather than, so I think we should keep it, but that's just my viewpoint.
Yeah, and right now, it's not on the schedule, so it would be a vote to add it to our schedule. So, I mean,
That would be the 20th of
The
December.
20th of
That's
December.
quite late. People are planning to, I'm staying home. Sounds like you're leaving.
You aren't always staying.
No, I try to,
There are staff.
every couple of years I get a week off.
I'm just saying that there are staff as well as commissioners who,
do we want to discuss this right now quickly? And we can take a motion and vote on it today if you would like.
Sure.
Oh,
Go ahead.
if I may, although that's not actually on your agenda, what I would recommend is that under city manager report, I will ask that question, and from the feedback that I get, I will then make a decision whether I believe that you should have a meeting or not. So I think that might be a way to get you to where you want to be.
Perfect. Saved by Dr. Reddy. Okay, moving on, it is that point of our agenda for the city manager report.
Great, well, let me start. First, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't joined you for a while, so I wanted to come in and just give you an update on a couple of matters. But I do have one order of business first. As you know, the holidays are coming, and we do have some issues with the boards and commissions, and I was just curious if there's any opinions one way or the other, if you wanted to have your December meeting.
Can the date be moved so that it's not the Thursday before Christmas?
Indeed. So the options are, obviously, you don't have the meeting, we could move the date up or back. It's your pleasure.
David, do you have any sense of when council will be doing the interviews for all the commissions?
I don't, just it's difficult getting all those things scheduled, so I don't actually know where they are in the process. I can certainly try and get an update for you, but I don't have it with me now.
But we can be kind of, for the people that are leaving, they can be assured that they're done in December.
Well, let me offer this. Before you leave the end of this meeting, let me check in with Christina to see if they have anything scheduled. They may not have been able to be scheduled. It's not uncommon to have some carryover. So we'll see if we can find that out for you shortly.
Okay, well, I mean, while my mic is on, I'm all for having a meeting in December. I'm probably available at this point on the 20th, but we could, Ariana can look to see when this room is available and do it either earlier that same week or the week before. Again, that's just a little bit of juggling, So I'll take any other comments.
The other thing I would just note is if you wanted to, we figure out a day that you want it. If you don't have a quorum, we could cancel it, or you could go with, even if you don't have a quorum, you could go with just informational. So those are some options you could have as a placeholder, and then you could always cancel it later.
I think we should have a December meeting, and we should have eggnog and cake, so that the three of us leaving can have eggnog and cake.
So does that mean we need to bring it?
I think David's gonna make it and bring it. Or maybe Marcus.
Make it.
I'll bring the eggnog if you bring the cake.
There you go.
Eggnog's easy. You bring the cake.
Okay, I'll bring the cake.
Okay, I think we're, do we have a motion to vote on this?
Well, yeah, can we hold on a second?
Sure.
I need to look at my calendar. Just real quick. Because I would,
It'll be a store-bought cake, though.
From where?
Oh, perfect.
I would like to make a motion to move the December meeting to December 6th and have it earlier. And then if we find in November that we've covered everything we need to and we decide not to have a meeting, we can do that. But that would be my motion, is to move to December 6th.
Well, and if I could, Mr. Chairman, if Commissioner Johnson would be okay with that, I would just informally throw out there if December 6th would work,
Oh,
as opposed to a formal motion.
okay. All right.
And please feel free to give me your input.
For me, no. I'm out of town.
Okay. All right.
Mark? Good.
I could make December 6th.
Christine?
I could make December 6th.
And Mr. Gray, I think, is yes.
I could make both dates.
And-
I can do the 6th, 13th, and 20th.
Okay, so you certainly would have a quorum for the 6th. If you're okay, one way or the other. Was there another date, Mr. Chairman, that you thought would be?
Well, or we could do the second Thursday, which would be the 13th.
The
But
13th.
again,
And is anyone not available on the 13th?
Does that affect, John?
Well, no, that's a whole nother question.
Yeah.
I can do the 13th.
Okay.
Okay, and my input is I'm not going to make the November meeting, so it'd be nice, I can make all three.
Okay, so it seems to me everyone's available on the 13th. So we'll
Yes.
make it, we'll plan on the 13th of December, and we will find you the appropriate location. We'll certainly shoot for here. Okay, great. So,
Great.
Aaron, if you could just check the availability. Great, thank you. Good. The other thing I did want to just let the commission know, is, you know, there's a lot of unanswered questions with regard to, not only is there's a significant amount of capital projects to be done, not enough resources, not the least of which, the library, you know, the next fire station that we've got to get started on, the Plaza Theater, and the other big issue is you may have an additional $2 million for the Andaz parking structure that we're hoping that the parking dollars we get from the Dream Hotel will cover potentially the Andaz requirement, which would free up $2 million for you, which would obviously be a significant thing. That being said is, I'm very appreciative that 5A, you're going to appoint a subcommittee to work with the council to review the capital projects, because we do need to get then some big decisions back to you for some final decisions, particularly now that you sort of have this true up, and Marcus will go through this with you. Obviously, you just got it. This will be a subject of your next meeting as well. We'll get you joining the subcommittee, and then as soon as practicable, we will get back to you some of these larger decisions at your next upcoming meetings. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I needed to say specifically, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
all right, thank you,
All right,
David.
great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right, next, our finance report. Marla.
What you have before you is the multi-summary funds available for Measure J. This is the traditional format that you've seen in the past. It says how much funding is available in the current year and how much is available projected for future years. These are what's in the budget right now. The $3,275,000 at the end of 19 is basically what is up for discussion when you meet with the subcommittee as far as reallocating money. Everything else is what was approved through the year and in the budget. So that's basically what I have.
I have a question. On the downtown park, which we plugged in $1 million, the city council approved an additional $650,000 for the
Correct.
downtown park?
Correct.
So that's not in here, correct?
That needs to be put in there. That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
So does that reduce the 3 million too?
Yes, it will.
Okay,
So it's 2,600,000.
Correct.
right.
And we will get that corrected for November.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All
I
right.
do have a question. The North Palm Canyon crosswalks, which crosswalks are those?
The ones up North Palm Canyon, right before you get to Vistachino, which are the newest ones.
Yeah,
So they've been
Stevens.
installed?
They've been installed. These project titles should be deleted. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I was not aware of any other crosswalks that we were putting in, so.
Okay, so we can get.
So crossing out North Palm Canyon crosswalks, thank you.
All right, let's move on to our projects update report.
This is the same thing as what you have, but it's just colored on the back page.
Awesome, thanks.
It's the same thing that you just got. It's just want you to be able to see the highlighted.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
You don't get one. I can't count.
It's kind of cool how it highlighted the logo as well.
Yeah.
of the sun rays. Very pretty.
So I'll
Looks great on
the chair suggested, I think it will be ripe for us to have a continuing conversation about this when we talk about projects in general next month. But, you know, we've tried to format this in a consistent way. This is, I think, the third year now. So on the first table, and I have to thank Joelle and Dawn for going through the exercise of all the Excel spreadsheets that back all this up. But so the 2018-19 budget is really not what that is. That's really accumulated cost to date. So there's been $93.9 million in Measure J revenue to date. This is through this fiscal year, though. So this includes the projected revenue and the approved budget for through this fiscal year. And then we've spent $64.2 million. So that leaves the $29.7 million available for various projects and debt service. And then we have the set aside for the airport. You're familiar with what that is? Okay. And capital projects. So if you follow along, we can move on to the next page unless you have questions. Okay? And this is very similar to what you saw last year, although I believe we added a few projects. So we have completed how many?
I think it was the last 6.
The last 6, yeah. So we've completed a number of projects and identified the Measure J funding that was spent on those projects. So Because this isn't the total cost of the project. This is just the Measure J funding that was appropriated towards those projects, so.
So I do have a question. Just, so the last 6 of these projects, starting with the Tockwitz Creek Master Plan, are what we're looking at right now? Or?
No, I was just emphasizing that from what we showed as completed projects. So basically, this true-up this year is showing you that we now have an additional number of projects that have been completed.
Okay, so these projects have been completed this year.
Correct.
Okay, on the very last project, the Missing Link sidewalks, it was my understanding those were funded by Senate Bill 821, but was this additional funding by Measure J?
This was the match, so we used the hotspots funding to do the match towards so it was basically a 50-50 match is what it worked out. But you're right, that was the discretionary funding from RCTC for Missing Link sidewalks.
Okay.
If we move on to the next page, we wanted to highlight for you, we've got a long list of capital projects that are in one phase or another moving forward to completion. The Palm Canyon electrical system just seems to be one of those projects that's just, the more you scratch the surface, the more you find out. So this is what I want to, I guess, explain. It seems that the electrical services for the backbone system on Palm Canyon in certain cases comes from overhead electrical lines in the back and cross in some form or fashion private property to the street. It's been a nightmare trying to figure out the solution because we want to remeter everything and put in new meters. And so we've literally we've engaged with a new consultant, first of all, and that took some time to get that up to speed. And then just going through the process of working with Edison to figure this all out has been interesting. And we're still drilling down because our new consultant has told us it's $3.6 million project, and I about had a heart attack. But just so that you can understand, this was identified many years ago as a priority project because if you've been there at Village Fest, we really have problems with the food vendors because the electricity that they require for their booths can't be sustained efficiently with our system that's down there. It was really an issue before we went and relamped all of the lamps to LED. Now that we've done that, that's given us some breathing room, but it's still an issue. What will likely happen is when we drill down on this project, we will identify a much shorter segment where we have the biggest problem during Village Fest with jerry-rigging electrical, an electrical system that can work for the vendors down there. And I don't know if that's from Tockwitz to Arenas or if it's Tockwitz North, but we're still evaluating that because obviously we don't have the funding and to do the full length of that project, which was literally from Baristo all the way north. Was it? No, I think it went all the way up to Amato. So we're still working forward on that, but it's had some very interesting challenges and complications just due to the nature of how old downtown is and how that electrical infrastructure exists. The police department and fire station rehabilitation, those are underway. There's no issues there with funding other than police department remodel project is out of contract time, and I would just leave it at that. There's legal issues there that they are continuing to work under a recovery plan, and we're coordinating with the surety, and the contractor has brought in new crew, new superintendent, and liquidated damages of $3,000 a day continue to accrue since September 1st. So
But the contractor is paying to the city?
at the end of the day, the contractor will owe the city liquidated damages. So it's a legal matter being handled through the city attorney's office. In general, what I've learned, because this is the first time in my career that we've had a project go this far sideways, when a contractor doesn't perform and you utilize the performance bond, which is why you have it, then the surety becomes essentially responsible for contracting to complete the project. They remain obligated per the terms of the contract for the price, the liquidated damages, and so forth. What often happens 90% of the time is the surety retains the same contractor because they're available and they're familiar with the project, and that's the direction we're going in, and we're hopeful, because the issues with this project really were related to subcontractors, the tile subcontractor and the cabinet subcontractor. And the tile work is what really delayed the project as far as it has. So those subcontractors have been released, and that was a process.
So we're in the process of removing a lot of the defective work right now.
Yep, all the tile work's being removed and replaced. And again, it's all at the contractor's cost. So Fire Station 4 is well underway. As far as we know, it's on schedule. I think you've seen the framing go up on the expansion. So it's scheduled to be completed, I think, April. So we will continue to see that project moving forward successfully. So the biking project. So there is $500,000 and change left over for non-motorized transportation plan projects, and this is one of those projects highlighted for discussion with the council subcommittee, because I hope you understand that at this point in time, based on the last council review and approval of Class 2 bike lanes and road diets, we have no more to install unless there's another effort to bring to council for reconsideration some of the other road diets that were possible. But at this point, in my mind, we're done with doing bike lanes. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other non-motorized projects to consider. So we just wanted to highlight that the bike lane projects are wrapping up the last round, which was actually funded with federal funds in addition to Measure J funds, and as I mentioned, so on the back page you'll see highlighted is the one of those projects. The last one highlighted actually is no, I'm sorry. There's two. So we had a separate account for the match for the federal grant, which is the CVAG bike lanes. And then we also have the 5th one, non-motorized transportation biking issue. So there's a 600,000 change. So we look forward to having a conversation with you next month about how we might repurpose those funds, or how, we need direction essentially.
And these are Measure J funds, the 560?
Yep.
And these are the funds that City Council took back essentially several years ago?
No.
Well, it was allotted to the non-motorized transportation plan, which subsequently changed to active transportation plan. So we started calling the new projects ATP projects. So when I see the non-motorized transportation, that's why I wonder if these were funds from several years ago.
They are, from several years ago, right. So there was a pot of money to essentially implement those active transportation projects, essentially all those bike lanes. And many of them weren't implemented because you'd take out parking, you know the whole history. So a lot of Class 2 bike lanes were eventually eliminated because you would eliminate on-street parking. So that we went through that process with council to essentially evaluate the non-motorized plan, review where we should and shouldn't have Class 2 bike lanes. Because at one point in time, there were a lot of Class 2 bike lanes shown on collector streets like Via Escuela and these other streets, which would have wiped out everybody's parking. And those went to Class 3 bike routes with sharrows. So a lot of the cost of what was anticipated in the non-motorized plan got reduced because we ended up eliminating a lot of Class 2 bike lanes. So if the desire ultimately is for the commission to recommend other active transportation projects, there's this funding here for that.
Is there any forum for bringing together people who have worked over years in Palm Springs on bicycle routes throughout the city that could be part of a forum like this?
Of course.
Before it comes back to the commission? It just seems like the users, and I know that there was a huge group with the Tahquitz Creek plan and the non-motorized transportation plan before it changed over that were very proactive in looking at routes for bicycles. And the conversation about making sure routes, existing routes connected with other routes and a viable destination, those kinds of things that perhaps active bike riders would be better able to talk about than inactive bike riders. Or not bike riders at all.
Farrell, and you never see a bike rider.
Oh, now wait a minute. You do see bike riders on Farrell. Lots of bike riders. I see them.
I go down that street every day.
Oh, I live off of Farrell. I see them.
Anyway, we won't go that
So
way.
I'm just asking if there's a possibility of the city scheduling something with active bike riders to get their input into something.
Yeah, and we've been in conversation with the unofficial ATP committee.
Okay, Brett,
Yep,
Vic,
and Nancy. Yep,
We met,
Okay.
we met with them in one morning and discussed
Okay.
some of these issues.
Okay,
yeah,
so they're part of it already. So I,
yeah. But I mean, at least from my perspective, from a council level policy decision, there's no more Class 2 bike lanes to be had. Because those would have to, those are, the only ones left are the ones that had, like South Palm Canyon, Road Diet, Racket Club. There were a couple of others that we had evaluated back in 2016 that the council had chosen not to pursue. But that decision can always change.
Yeah,
Sure.
one of the city council meetings I was at, there was discussion about bike lanes on the new two-way Indian Canyon. Is that still viable?
No, Indian has always been, even on the 2011 non-motorized plan, a Class 3 route. And the only way to put bike lanes there would be to take out the parking. The next, I'm sorry.
A question, two questions, actually. One, the Tahquitz Creek Master Plan has been updated. Is there going to be some requirements for money in bike trails there? And second question, where is the city with their portion of CV Link commitments?
So Tahquitz Creek Master Plan, there was really never any funding to implement it. I mean, there was leftover money from the budget available to develop the master plan. But as I recall, that Tahquitz Creek Master Plan had a rough estimate of many millions of dollars to implement. And there were efforts years ago to go after some of the different prop grant funding, which is very, very competitive for those types of projects. But so And I guess we jumped ahead, but that's why one of those, the $84,000 that's left over, that was the original. I think there was like $300,000 budgeted many years ago to develop the Tacos Creek master plan. So the $84,000 is just what's left over from that first phase on developing that plan. And you really can't do anything with $84,000 as far as implementation. And, so the reason we highlight it is it's just sitting there, and we don't want it to just sit there for years and years and years. So part of our discussion perhaps next month would be, well, do we leave it there and hope we budget more money for actually implementing the master plan, or do we repurpose it for another priority project? But until we get direction from the commission and council, but we've always been focused on new money. So that's why I think this is a really useful exercise to look at what's on the books for projects that are in the design phase but need to get into construction kind of thing. So, but I did want to go back to the ongoing capital projects and highlight the 2018 street repairs. That's fully funded and moving forward actively in construction. The last project, which I know is near and dear to some commissioners or the entire commission, is the community hotspots project. So, as you know, there was $3.2 million over 3 years. This fiscal year was proposed for hotspots 2.0. Council hasn't yet officially adopted the capital budget for Measure J. So we show the $1 million and continue to show that on your financial report. Yes, Commissioner.
So the $2 million that were allotted a little over a year ago for the Hotspots Project 2.0 was actually the city funding for the $6 million in grants from CVAG. So I can't even imagine that city council would pull that funding.
I hope not either.
Once we have received $6 million.
Right. I highlighted that fact in the staff report that went to council last month. The fact that when we had council approve the CVAG reimbursement agreements, that the intent was that for 18, 19, 19, 20, those $1 million a year would be the match. And so when we have the final conversation with plugging in the rest of the funding for 18, 19, I will continue to advocate, as I did in the staff report that went.
Well, and I understand that we're just really close to starting construction on this project?
Indian Two-Way, we ended up funding through more CVAG grant funds, and we ended up using, I believe, local Measure A or gas tax. And the new gas tax. So we ended up not having to tap into Measure J money for that one, as I recall. Where we will need it is the project that's out to bid now, which is the final 2 projects, which implements all of the improvements from Amato to Chiva on Palm Canyon all the way down around the bend, and puts in all the street lights on the curve where it's dark. And so that project is a $5 million? $5.2 million project. So, it's on my list. So, so just for the benefit of the public, we bundled all of those Hotspots 1.0 projects together. We ended up bidding it. It was a $1.8 million contract. Council ultimately did not award that and directed us to proceed to apply for ATP Cycle 4. And Don busted his butt and did a great application, and we are hopeful that we will get that funding. And so that the $2.2 million that's sitting in accounts is available for budgeting for other projects with the caveat that we are successful in getting ATP Cycle 4 grant funds. What I had suggested in the staff report that went to council last month was utilizing those funds for the CVAG grant match, only as a way to avoid having the general fund loan the second year of Community Hotspots 2.0 funding from 1920 and moving that forward. It's all a matter of cash flow issues that I'm learning. And so that's where we get into this discussion on the community projects 18, 19, 19, 20.
But can we, so you're finished talking about community projects 2015, 18?
Yes.
Okay. So when I go back over the project list from 2015, 18, there were a number of projects that were not completed on that list, and including sidewalks that were the GAP project that was part of this project, and just the sidewalks alone, not doing the sidewalks alone, is $1.4 million that are still in the account, or in, I don't know the language to use for this, but on the books for these projects. A number of the projects that were not done would come to another $1.7 million. So I'm just not sure what happened to that money. Projects that were scheduled to be done that weren't done.
Well, what had happened was the estimates in that original table were way off the mark. So there were a number of projects where there was no way to build them with the funding that was estimated.
There were also a number of projects that our engineering department at the time studied to make sure they warranted what was suggested for the project, recognizing that this is a community project and not that's generated by the community, and many people in the community are not engineers. And so our engineers studied these projects to make sure they were warranted. And we have many, many projects that were not warranted as requested. So those projects were not completed, other than the $3,000 cost of warranting, of doing the study. So what happened to that money?
So Marcus, just to recap, if you guys remember our last meeting, we presented you a table of the Community Hotspots 1.0, all the projects that were approved for the $3 million. And then in researching all of that, there were many projects that either like a traffic signal didn't meet warrants, or stop sign warrants, or the neighbors refused to put sidewalks in front of their properties. So there was a bunch of them that the money were never spent. And so we finally organized it in an easy to read, or easier to read item. So as commissioners in the past has been focused on new money, all of a sudden we started to realize, I think it was one of the commissioners said, hey, we have almost $1 million in the original $3 million budgeted that can be reprogrammed. So that's kind of, I think, where you're coming from,
yes,
right?
Yes, I'm just, we didn't do the sidewalk projects that Measure J had allocated funding for. The sidewalk projects that were done were paid for by Senate Bill 821. I think that's the number of it. And so what?
So you're talking about the projects that we bid but did not build.
Correct.
So the idea is we're going to be getting the federal or state or federal grant. It's one or the other, but the ATP Cycle 4 grant will award us the funding to do that project. So it's not that those sidewalks won't be done, we're just waiting to get the word from Caltrans that our grant has been approved.
But, okay, and I appreciate that, I think leveraging Measure J funds for grants is fabulous and a great return on investment there. But we still budgeted $1.4 million for sidewalks that were never completed. So somehow it seems like that money should be, should continue to show on the Measure J plus side as money to be used for other projects if we're waiting for.
I think we're saying the same thing.
But isn't that what that's
You know,
saying right
if
here?
I had had this yesterday so I could read it, I would
Yeah.
be, but I have
No,
not had a chance.
we're on the same
to read it.
page. So there's
Okay.
money on, there's 2.2 million left from Hotspots 1.0 that hasn't
Okay.
been spent.
Okay,
And so that money is available, because when I went to council to have them award that contract, they made the decision that no, at this point, we'd rather you pursue grant funding for that and utilize Measure J funds for other priority projects. So that's where we're at today, and with the effort of the commission subcommittee and the council subcommittee, we can have a discussion on what that means.
So will that go into this funds available, the 3.275, to make it?
Not really, because that's where it gets confusing, because that's prior year money. So that's why when you saw last month's report, it got really confusing, because you're bringing forward all prior year expenditures and revenues and monies that are on account for existing projects. And so that's the only way to show that, is if we start making the monthly financial report much larger and counting every dime to date. Yeah, so.
Can I ask, have you have not gotten confirmation of the ATP4 grant yet?
No.
No, we're
What happens
sometime in December is when we'll get it.
What if you don't get it? Then that 2.2 million won't be available. Or the 1.8 or whatever you need.
Well, the money's there. So then, you know, if the commission and council haven't made a decision on how to utilize all the funds that are available, or maybe they only decide on the 3.2 million that's available in current fiscal year money. But you know, that's a decision that needs to be made. If the grant's not awarded, then are we going to utilize the funds that are on account for that project and rebid that project?
But assuming that the grant is awarded, then you would have another 2.2 in addition to the, well, there's no longer 3.2, it's 2.6 at the bottom of this year's fiscal, that council or the subcommittee could work with. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
It's not on the report.
And Marcus, the 2.2 left is for Hotspots 1.0 only, correct?
Uh-huh.
The first phase?
Right, so what's been spent to date is the match for the SB 821 sidewalks that were built on Indian. And then there were some various smaller projects that were completed that were on that table that Don mentioned.
So just to kind of summarize for my simple thinking on this, Christine, I know you've worked with Don, I believe, to kind of go through some of the itemization. And we have that, correct, from last meeting? I still have it in my folder. I didn't really look at it today again, but that's something that we can review. So just for my knowledge, we've got money left that hasn't been spent because the projects haven't moved forward, and we're also waiting to see if we're gonna get grant money.
Yes.
If the grant money will pay for some of these things, then that money out of that 2.2 million will not get spent for 1.0. We can use that to strengthen our community project pot, basically, in a very simplified manner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Unless it goes to the fire department.
Well, that's
or
what
the
I'm-
police
you know.
department, or.
Well,
It leaves it open for prioritizing for projects, the commission and
It
the
stays
council.
within Measure J, though. We can decide.
Yes, absolutely.
Where that money goes.
We can recommend.
Well, the city council, and I think this is really important, and I wish I remembered dates better than I used to, but the city council, a number of years ago, agreed that that this commission would have $1 million a year to use for community projects and community projects alone. And so we were assured of this, and I'm just saying this for the commission. But now I'm wondering if that just changes by who's on city council. Oh, no. Everything's changed, so. Yeah, it was a different council. You've got the policy there?
Policy in your packet?
It's in the package.
Number 3, policy.
It's on the yearly review thing. On the yearly calendar.
Okay.
It's on the yearly calendar, everything, the thing.
Me, our calendar?
Yeah.
The road
Right at
map.
the top.
The road
Right up
map.
here. Oh, yeah.
The policy.
And that's what we had approved
It's right
in the
here.
last meeting.
Yeah, number 6.
Yeah.
Number 3.
So I'm just saying, commissioners, I think it's incredibly important for the citizens of Palm Springs, the residents of Palm Springs, to guard this money.
Can I, if I'm reading the hotspots 1.0, I mean, the things that are being done are sort of, rather than spending the community projects, we're spending grant money. So what you're saying now, even though that's doing things that were on the community project list, that the community project funds should come back to the commission to be allocated as we see fit. Because my recollection was that the $1 million was totally under the control of this commission, and the council would adopt whatever we recommended. But now that what we recommended is being paid for by other funds, I'm not sure if that's still the case.
Well, and I am strongly in favor of using that community fund budget as matching funds for grants. But if the projects then can't be done because there's no more grant money, or the Measure J funds need to be used someplace else, and then we're going to wait for more grant money to come our way, then my question is, we've got this money allocated. It was covered in the project initially, so why is it going away? Why aren't we doing these projects from 2015?
I'm agreeing, it's a
Yeah.
valid question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're all on the same
Okay.
page. I mean, if the cost was $2 million to do hotspots, there's two issues that come into play. One is grant money could come in to pay for some of it. I think our belief is, as a commission, that if we save $500,000 because a grant came in, then that $500,000 is money that can be added to the next community project. It should be up to our discretion and to the community on how that is spent. And the grant covers Hotspots 1.0. And if there are projects within hotspots that cannot be completed, as we have seen on that report, and that's saving money, then that money too should go back into that community projects pot, that we have discretion and can choose how that is going to get spent. And again, an example of that would be moving on to the next community project, which I believe might be parks. You know, there might be overages. We might find out, wow, with what we want to do to parks is going to cost $1.7 million, and we only have allotted $1 million per year. However, we saved money through hotspots, or because of grants that came in and covered some of those costs, we have an extra $1 million. So I would say, I think that we all agree that's how we want these monies to be spent, that this is our discretion and it continues to feed into the community projects.
Can I just think, I mean, I think what is very confusing to myself and I'm sure the general public is the definition of what a community project is. And all of these projects could be defined as community projects. So I think until that is settled, it's very confusing. So you just said, oh, well, what about the downtown park? Well, maybe 50% of the citizens say, well, I think that benefits the community, and 50% say it doesn't. They don't really care about the park. So I understand that at the beginning when this commission started, we had community meetings, and that's kind of where these community, quote, projects came from, I guess. But
We didn't, but
anyway, I think that that's very confusing because, yes, for commissioners who have been here a long time, you understand probably what is a community project and what's not a community project. But for us commissioners who have just come on, I look at all these projects and say, well, the fire station's a community project. They're all community projects. So I don't know how you're going to define that. When I've been on other commissions, if the project is not done at the end of the fiscal year or is done and there's money left over, then certainly on the library board, we would move that out of line item B and put it into line item C because we don't need a line item B anymore. That project's finished. And maybe that's what this commission also needs to do, that at the end of a fiscal year, we review these projects and the ones that will never be done, we have to move. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. But that's just my 2 cents and where I'm coming from. And otherwise, I think I don't exactly know how else to give advice.
what happened with these projects was the Measure J funding, as it began to come in from the state, was part of the general fund budget, and we appreciate that. And it was being used more and more for public projects. And the idea in the original marketing of the Measure J tax was that there would be money available for community projects. The community could make some decisions about money. Right. And so we asked City Council if we could identify just $1 million a year for the community to identify as projects. And so that's what we've done.
Yeah. And so that, and then we would define very carefully what falls, can I finish?
Yeah.
What a community project is. And in return for this agreement with that city council, it was agreed that everything else would be, staff would present, and we would only consider those. And that was the, whatever you want to call it, the deal that was made.
But didn't this only happen once? I mean, at the beginning, there were these community meetings, and that's when you got input.
No,
But there have never been, to my knowledge, community meetings since.
That wasn't true. What you just said, Michael, the community projects, the direction of that money was to be decided by the Measure J Commission. Right. And there was, when we initially had Project 1, or whatever we call it, Phase 1, you had an active group that met. We talked about whether to spend it on parks, or spend it on hotspots, or spend it on streets, and all kinds of things. And we decided on hotspots. And in conjunction with 1PS, we came up with a whole list of hotspots. The difference between community projects that we're talking about and other projects is these projects, the ideas come from this commission. All the other projects, we work from a list now that's provided by staff. So it's two very different things. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so in the spring, it could be the fall, winter, various commissions, like last year, the Parks Commission came in and made a presentation, and we're working with them on that, and we're also working Engineering picked up the hotspots piece again, which was approved at one of those commission meetings, and found grant funding. So took a 2-year project and essentially had 4 years of funding to spend on this project, and has done all the design work, and we're ready to go on it. So it's coming from the commission, and we're hearing from the public about what they want at commission meetings. So it also involves a fair amount of going to commission meetings and inviting commissions to come up with projects for the commission. And Parks did come forward this year.
I thought that when you came and said for the Parks and Rec, if they'd like to come up with an idea, that was a wonderful way of working, because that was able to put together to come to the commission at that time and make a presentation. And so that reaching out within the community to the different commissions, I think I think that's a great idea, and I think it worked.
And it's fledgling, and more. I think it will work even better in the future when
I agree.
People start understanding that what's happening.
So rather than belabor this all evening, I think the only question is, if that $2.2 million becomes available from the Group 1 projects, does that come back to us, or does that go back into sort of the general fund that is applied towards staff recommended projects?
John, I thought you made a motion in our last meeting to create a line item for this kind of money that's left over in community projects that would go specifically into a community projects line, so it wouldn't fall down into the existing budget.
If I didn't, I can do it now.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was going to say that too, and I was even going to call that out, because I recall you saying that.
Yeah.
And seeing if we should have, and I don't know if that would fall under Marla's summary that she gave us. And it really we wouldn't want to tie it with that 2.6 million of, net new funds available. We don't want to confuse, because like Marcus said, this is money that's already kind of basically was allocated and not spent. And I think maybe in order for it to be available, we have to be assured that, okay, the grant is secured, or that the project is 100% completely dead. That, from engineering, we know that we're not going to be able to build a sidewalk on this section of land due to whatever reason. And then we can see that, okay, these are community project monies over time. And let's face it, $1 million barely buys a stop sign today. So,
Get a good stop sign. That's 10,000.
So, leftover money is important to this community projects. If the Art Commission came to us and said, hey, we want Measure J to do something with public art for its next community project, $1 million goes fast. That's sometimes 2 pieces and that's it.
So what we had suggested to the commission and to council is to utilize the Hotspots 1.0 funds as the match to the final CVAG projects that are out to bid now. Because we were able to use, as I mentioned earlier, we were able to go to CVAG and get more CVAG funding for Indian Two-Way project. So we ended up getting not 2 million, but 3.5 million from CVAG for that project. And we were able to also find remaining local Measure A, and we programmed new SB1 gas tax funds. So we were able to cobble together that project without utilizing any Measure J funds. So where it says community projects 1819 through 1920 on your memo, I've identified this fact that we've got the remaining 2 CVAG projects, which we've bundled together in one, and we're anticipating a shortfall, which is literally the grant match funding that we need. And I don't need your decision today, but what we were suggesting was that 2.2 million that's available from Hotspots 1.0 would slide over and essentially cover the match for this project, the CVAG funded project. We're hopeful that we don't need more than that. Maybe we need less. I can tell you that the Indian two-way contractor, Belco, was also the low bidder on the next project, CVAG project we bid, which are the two signals at Villa Escuela and Villa Merleste. And so we're hopeful that they'll be the low bidder on this next project, and their price will be competitive because they're already mobilized in here. So,
Well, because just to recap, can you tell us roughly what those 5 CVAG projects are, those 2 traffic lights?
sure. So the first one was the North Palm Canyon crosswalks. So that's why that 200,000 for the North Palm Canyon crosswalks is still sitting in an account. And Sid, I owe you a colored copy of the.
Thank you.
I think it's on there, right?
Felt left out.
Yeah. So, no, it's not. Why isn't it?
When you say sometimes it could be less, is that really true?
Not really anymore. When the economy's booming, it hurts our contract costs. So it was the North Palm Canyon crosswalks, the 2 signals, the Vista Chino and Villa Merleste, and North Palm Canyon and Villa Escuela. So CVAG gave us money for those signals as well as Caltrans. And I believe we were able to fund the rest of that with gas tax or Measure A, I forget.
That's 3, 2 more.
There's 2 more. So they were on Palm Canyon. So there was a Palm Canyon project through downtown. Again, this is all really related to improvements to the traffic signals. We're going to be doing scramble crosswalks at 4 intersections. So just like you see in New York or wherever, at Amado, Andreas, Tockwitz, and Arenas. Because the pedestrian warrants there were so high that there'll now be an all pedestrian phase, so you can walk diagonally across the intersection. But so those projects involve new pop-outs, new traffic signals with all new detection equipment and everything to make it much more safe. And then the 5th project is dealing with South Palm Canyon through East Palm Canyon. So we had a couple of fatalities and a number of bad injuries due to it's poorly lit, lack of crosswalks, so that's going to install some additional crosswalks, street lighting through the bend, and other improvements.
And the commission will recall last year when this was discussed that Palm Springs Police Department went through all of their accident reports for a period of time, and we picked the worst of the worst traffic corridor in the city, and this is it. And this is why it was funded and why we were able to find grants to pay for the balance of it, the worst of the worst.
And that intersection by South Palm Springs, Palm Canyon, when it goes up there, on the curve, that's really been bad. Because I've been with the police on ride-alongs with fatalities, and that's a very rough spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was there once on the jaywalk.
So getting into the weeds, the CVAG grants required that we were in construction by December. And we had the bulk, we had 6 million of the 10 million CVAG awarded was to Palm Springs. So they're really looking to us to show the entire membership of CVAG that this call for projects and safety projects was worthwhile. So that's why I was scrambling to put the pieces together in terms of dollars. And I would have liked to have been able to say, well, let's just hold the 2.2 million from Hotspots 1.0, but I'm looking to where I can show the council they can award a contract because we've got money in the bank to pay for it. So that's just kind of because they want to do another call for projects, but they don't want to do it till they can basically say, well, Palm Springs is done, they've awarded, they're in construction. And then they'll do another release for projects, and we intend to submit for a traffic circle on Indian and Palm Canyon and Camino Paracela, which we hoped to have included in the Indian two-way, but it was too expensive.
So are you planning bulb outs as well on Indian?
There are a few bulb outs at, I think, Arenas and, yeah.
Okay, and again, thinking that the bulb outs shorten the distance that pedestrians walk in the street, actually. So it would be good.
If we can move on, the last project, no, I'm sorry, there's more projects to talk about. Downtown Park, so that's another one that is going to need money. And so we'll have this conversation with your subcommittee and council subcommittee. Sure.
The money you said you'd like to have, that you'd hope could be approved today, the 2 point.
No, I think we can have that conversation next month.
Okay.
And definitely should, I don't know when you'll have a subcommittee meeting, but there'll be a point in time, and it might be sometime in December. We want to be able to award the contract in December. CVAG knows where we're at. They'd prefer we award the last contract in December. But we'll need to at least have a conversation in November and definitely your December meeting.
Okay, so you need.
Yeah, about it to see where we're at. The bid opening date is November 20th, if we don't extend it. But so the downtown park is obviously a very top priority project, I think, for this commission and the council. I highlighted this again in the staff report that went to council last month. Rios's team has updated their cost estimate, which has it at $6.5 million. That includes the expanded police substation that council approved recently. I think we should expect bids to come 20% over estimate, because I've seen them higher than that. So I'm thinking the contract will be $7.8 million. And of course, we need contingency, as you know, for things that come up, change orders, administration. So I'm thinking that we need $8.5 million for delivering that project. What we have budgeted and available is $2.25 million from Measure J. Quimby Park fees of $2.5 million, which means we need another $3.75 million to be able to, I think, fully fund the project. But I've looked at where we have other funds, and so we have accumulated additional Quimby fees, so I'll be having council consider allocating the remaining $600,000 in unallocated Quimby Park fees to the park. And I had suggested the $1 million for community projects in 18-19 that hasn't officially been budgeted yet, could go to fill the gap for the park. But
So you're still trying to come up with 3.75?
I'm still trying to come up with $3.75 million. Yeah.
We did, I think before you were on, when we approved that money for the community projects, we were doing the hotspots first and then the parks, the next two. And we did come up with an agreement that it could be pulled to be used for downtown.
And my thinking was, we will get our ATP grant. We will finish out the Hotspots 1.0. That money finishes out Hotspots 2.0, and then that $1 million is now available for the parks. Just trying to keep it aligned with what the commission's goals were for the funds.
But Mark is absolutely correct. We did make that decision, and Parks and Rec understood that when we had this discussion with them, that if the downtown park needed these funds, we would take the money and allocate it to that. So that, we've already agreed on that as a commission.
And so it doesn't necessarily have to be other parks.
Aren't you still a couple $1 million short?
We'd still be 1.75 short, 1.75.
I had it all worked out, so. I don't have the other staff report in front of me, but,
Okay, so you're saying you need 8 million, where am I? 8.5 million. So you'd be taking 4.6 from Measure J in total, right?
let me redo the math.
And then 2.2 from, 2.5 from Quimby Fund.
Putting down an additional 0.6.
And 0.6 from the additional Quimby Fund, so roughly 3. Okay, you're close. Not exactly, but close. That'd be one fine park.
Yes. It's got a lot of bells and whistles.
Most expensive acre and a third in the whole city.
It'll be nice. Moving on, so as David mentioned, the current Measure J budget has programmed in this fiscal year budget's $2 million for, as our payment to the developer of the Andes Hotel for the free parking that's going to be provided as part of that project. We anticipate he's on schedule to complete that and open it by July 1st. So we would be obligated to pay him, but we have funds available through a separate agreement related to the Dream Hotel to replace parking lost on that site, which we intend to use with council's approval to pay this cost, which frees up the $2 million from the Andes parking structure. That is the additional money that I'm saying we need to go to the park. Yeah.
And how much does the Dream Hotel have to pay the city?
It was 2.7 million, and they've already paid over 550,000 to us to finish out the convention center parking lot on the east side. So there's 2 million and change left for them to pay us.
Okay, so then.
And it was intended to replace parking, so it makes sense to.
And so David's hope is that council will approve, then at least the 2 million gets
Correct.
put right over to Andaz and wipes it out for us.
So that, I mean, you have discretion to at least review and consent to repurposing that 2 million. In this case, again, the park's gonna be here ready to bid in the spring, so we'll need to know we have the funding to commit to that. I don't really need to talk about the buzz. So I think I just want to jump, because I think I'm late, 20 minutes late to my last meeting. Again, on the last page, we just highlighted some projects. So we've talked about some of these projects, but like building microfilm to intern. I mean, that's the name of the account. I believe there was funding in one of the first Measure J budgets to do a project for the building department to put their plans to microfilm. Anyway, it's just been sitting there year after year after year. So I thought it was important for you to look at this. I think for the commissioners that are leaving us, maybe you'll resurrect your notes from 2012 or 13. Alejo Belardo Church Lot, I mean, I talked to David today about this. There was a $400,000 budget for that. We've not even moved forward with design or anything on that. It's kind of on hold. I don't know what the intent was with that. $400,000 will repave the lot. I don't know that would pay to put in new landscaping and lighting. And again, what's the long-term goal for that parking lot? So we've not moved forward with that. And
does the city own that lot?
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Mr. Gray, dear to your heart, is the library phase 1. I think again that yeah, there. I don't know why there were 2 different accounts, but it must have come in 2 different years. But but we've completed the preliminary analysis, that report, and so the rest of this funding is there. but I don't know that you can really do anything with $500,000 with what needs to be done at the library. And of course, that's the bigger conversation with, is it going to stay there? Are we doing a joint library with COD? So do we just hold these funds? These are just questions to ponder for next time.
Well, yeah, that's why I think we have to sit down with them. I mean, I know where they're heading, but I can't really say that without.
Are we sure about that number?
I think the city council has 2 members that have already met with the board, and so there are some ideas of where that's heading, but I think what really needs to happen is a 3 to 5 year budgeted plan, and probably this is just would be a drop in the bucket.
Right. And even if the library ends up being a joint library with the COD, we need to do something with that building.
Right, and you know, it's going to be complicated because it has 3 sources of funds, 2 of which already have funds sitting there. So, you know, I think what their boards are going to want is at least a commitment from the city of a certain amount of money, and then they can move forward with Plan A, B, or C.
And as David mentioned, we don't even have projects on here, but we know we need to do Fire Station 3 next, Fire Station 1 downtown, ultimately Fire Station 5 needs to be redone. And so keep in mind that Fire Station 4, the total cost of that project is probably $7 million, $6 million. Multiplied by 4.
What did it start at? You said it looks like 7, but it was.
Well, I mean, by the time you could do design and architects and, you know,
You can almost double today.
yeah.
Did it with the fire station? Yeah. Police station.
What is the uptown parking structure? Does anyone know?
That's
what
the
that-
Andes. So,
That's the Andes,
yeah,
okay.
this is literally out of the finance system, so these are the account names that we implemented by staff.
Did you say you would reallocate that 2 million into the next fiscal year? Is that what you just said? Maybe I missed that.
For the Andes?
Yeah.
That will need to go towards the downtown park.
But I mean, that would have to stay in this budget for this year.
Mhm.
There's no extra money there.
No, it's just reallocating it for,
And we'll get the 2 million for the Andes from the 1920 budget.
no, the Andes is being paid
Laura
by the
Kidby.
Dream Hotel.
So this 2 million would go to the, but I thought you
I should
were
say,
taking
we're
$1 million.
suggesting that that's where that would come from.
I thought-
Otherwise, the Measure J will have to pay that. But it makes sense that it'll come from,
I thought you were almost where you needed to be with the downtown park, like 700,
We-
800,000.
we
If
are,
you-
with the 2 million that's programmed for the Andes parking lot. Yeah. That's where you were asking me about the shortfall. I needed to remind myself there was the 2 million I was suggesting coming from the Andes.
Which made up the 3.7.
Well, not to belabor a point, I'm gonna do it anyway, but I just did this math. If I'm reading what you have in the downtown park discussion here, there was 3 million paid from Measure J funds. You're asking that another million be switched from the 1819 Community Projects Fund. There was 650,000 that was approved by the council in addition to the 3 million. There's 2.5 million that comes from Quimby Park fees, and there's another 600,000 that you're going to find from future Quimby Park fees, which to me comes up to $7,750,000, if I added that right, 6, 7, I think I did. And you say the required budget now.
8.5.
But I didn't
So
count.
you're only 750,000.
I didn't count the third million from Measure J because that's coming from 1920. Right. Because that money really doesn't exist yet. So I'm anticipating we're going to be awarding a contract this fiscal year for the downtown park, so I was looking at where I could cobble together funds this fiscal year. But you're right, if we get into the next fiscal year, then there would be that third million from Measure J.
So you would need the entire 2 million.
Correct. Yep. I hope that made sense.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Okay. So we have one item for new business, and this is to appoint a Measure J commissioner from our commission to be a liaison to work with the council subcommittee. And that subcommittee consists of Mayor Moon and Council Member Holstage, and that is to review capital projects. And I will open it up for any discussion and recommendations.
I just have a comment or question, actually, if Jim.
Sure.
Is there a requirement that this subcommittee be appointed immediately, or is this something that could wait until new commissioners come on board? And I'm only saying that because there's such a small group of people that will be here that will be expanded soon by new people and maybe help with some of the work involved in that.
My understanding from Marcus is they need to make some decisions before December, so that probably isn't feasible.
Yeah, and I just to throw my 2 cents in, I definitely recommend Commissioner Johnson for this. He's got some history, which I think would be important in dealing with this. To throw someone new into it, I think it would be, I don't know that we would get as much mileage out of it, quite honestly, so.
Didn't we historically have at least 2 people that were part of this group? I'm wondering why we only have 1 liaison instead of 2. I think we had 2 or 3 at one point, didn't we? 2, okay.
And I'm open to that. I think for right now, we're looking at in 2 months, we're going to be down to very few people. And hopefully we're going to have 4 new people. And maybe at that time, that might be appropriate for someone else. Plus, we're all getting spread thin because we're all on other subcommittees as well.
If that's a motion, I'd like to second it.
For Commissioner okay.
I accept.
Okay, so we'll vote on that then to appoint Commissioner Johnson to the subcommittee to work with the Capital Improvement Subcommittee of Mayor Moon and Councilmember Holstage. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Can I just ask, Hannah, how many applicants are there right now for?
There's still 5.
5 applicants right now? For the 4 seats?
When will the council make some decisions, or do you know?
I was told that they don't have a set date for interviews yet, and they won't have one before November 10th. So there are 3 commissions that they need to set interviews for, and they have to do them all at once.
But is the plan by December 31st?
Yes.
Ariane, is it appropriate for our November meeting just under old business? I think a lot of us would love to digest a lot of what we got today and revisit some of this again under old business. I also would like, I think, a good nuts and bolts on the hotspots. So again, if we can just get another copy of that report that you had provided last month, that just kind of shows, again, the status of everything on 1.0, 2.0. I need it simplified for my little brain, and that way too we can kind of go through that. And I think I think maybe Marla, from your report, that we can kind of, and whether it happens in November, maybe it's something that won't happen until December or January, where we can start to identify community project money that we know is just not going to be spent. That we're going to see, wow, out of all that was allocated for hotspots 1.0, 500,000 of it is dead. It's just not going to happen. And that way we know that that's money that we can put then back into community projects, and whether that's going towards the downtown park or the next community project that happens after that, which could be something completely out of the box. So
Right. Would it be okay to tie in the spreadsheet to the report you got today and where it fits into the whole scheme of things? That's, I'll dedicate myself to get that
tied
done
into
for
like
you.
this, or
Where it fits in there, and maybe making a caption to say this is where that money is or isn't or needs to be.
yeah, as long as it's just, I don't want it to get muddled with what's just general fund, because a lot of this was Measure J that was being used towards, because none of this is hotspots.
Christine, there was never any determination of how to spend Hotspots 2.0 money, was there?
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise?
Yeah, we had 2 months of presentations from Palm Springs Police and neighborhood people, residents.
Well, 1 point and for 18, 19, and 19, 20?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
The 3-year plan was Hotspots 1, that was 3 years.
Yeah.
Hotspots 2 was another 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, it'll be separate from that report, that,
The one that looked like what we saw last month. It was kind of line item, like this was what was allotted, and then it gave the reason why it wasn't gonna, or we're still waiting on bids, or we're waiting on matching grant. We found out today that's important. So if a grant's coming in, great, we know that maybe we're not gonna have to spend $20,000, $50,000, whatever. So I think that would be helpful. And then we can start to slowly close out some of that and move forward too.
So many of those projects, and these, that group of projects was identified by residents who didn't have a lot of knowledge of engineering requirements for so many of the projects. So engineering had to study many projects, and I knew that a warrant to identify whether a project was warranted or not was about $3,000. So even if you could say on the spreadsheet that is what the city paid to determine that this was a project that really didn't warrant completion, then that's an expense that the city goes to. But I would add to that we did another project prior to the Hotspots project, and I don't believe all of those projects were completed. And I think we had 58 projects. It may have been more than that, and we may want to take a look at that. Where they're at, yes. Because I know
Is there a title for that, Christine?
I don't know, the first project, the first Measure J.
The first Measure J
project.
projects.
And these were also projects that were submitted by
And I think, Marla, you gave me
the
a
public.
list when we met, so I can look at that too.
It's about a size 8 font.
Well, I summarized it last month to show how much money was available for each project that was unspent, but it doesn't say are the projects completed or not. This is just from a funding perspective to show what's in the fund.
Right.
So is that something, you got that last month?
Well, I got it, just to bring me up to speed, and I haven't had a chance to really dive into it, because it's big. I mean, it was from the beginning, right? From
Yes.
the
It was
birth
everything
date of Measure J.
Because each one of these items has a line item under Measure J as an account. So it shows us how much was allocated to the fund, and then I went through the financial system, how much was spent, how much is still available as of the end of the year. So That's what that report was.
I'll leave it up to you if you want to see that.
I
If
think-
you want to send that out and we can look at it.
I think it's part of this committee and the history of this
And
committee.
again, as clear as possible.
Well, I don't have the I'm not even talking in here. I don't have the history for all of it, but like Marcus was saying, the accounts were set, a brief description in the system when they were set up, and that's what I have, is what's in the system. And that's where that report came from.
Yeah, whatever I saw made sense.
Okay.
So, and likewise with hotspots, what I saw, and I mean, I've got it in my pile of papers back here. You know, this is a nice summary, but it doesn't quite explain everything to me when I look at this. So,
Have any of you seen, we used to get a large spreadsheet. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
And we quit taking that. So probably the biggest thing is to just find the latest one we had and go through and just say complete. And
If we could have this 2 weeks before the next meeting, if possible.
well, our next meeting is in 2 weeks, but
We meet
Even-
2 weeks.
Scratch that.
Even a week.
actually, I
Well-
would
I just
suggest,
wanted to be
because you and
able
I
to
will
have-
be gone
have
next
the
week.
three of you be able to give us input from history that'll help us.
Well, one of the things back to this whole community project versus city project, I really think we need to tie up the terminology. And if you're giving me a list, I want to know, quote, what are the community projects and what are the city projects? Because going forward, there's going to be hardly anyone who's going to know that that's a community project. Because it's very difficult for me to determine how that project was initiated. Nobody says on these lists, this is a community project. I know the people who've been here from the beginning know that, but we don't know that.
And
So,
they have been separate all along. The list, the community project list has been separate from the city project list.
so
The city project list may have a line for hotspots or community projects or something like that. But the list of community projects, the detail, yes, is separate on a
but when I look at this list, it doesn't tell me which of these is a community project and which is a city project.
probably not.
No. It says, here's the total capital projects. I have no idea.
yeah, and that way,
Most of
again, like
those,
with hotspots, if that's broken out, I don't know, I'm sorry. I don't know who this question is for, if it's for Marla or staff. Is it possible to break out the community projects prior to the hotspots? The hotspots I know is a separate spreadsheet, because I have it. I don't know about, or if it's identified.
Let me look. I believe we have them split up by department numbers in our financial statement.
Okay.
We've got projects by accounts, and then I believe we have departments that are by hotspots and community. Some of them, I know when Jeff Kill was here, he was kind of grouping them, and the system doesn't show how that grouping comes up. But some in the system are by departments. So they are kind of grouped together as well. So let me look at that again. I think it might be on my list as well, but
Because,
let
yeah,
me
that would,
take a new look, another
that
look
would
at
just
it.
be important for us, and again, just, and really simplified, so that we know, maybe that, what years that came from. I don't know if it would show that, so, let me just think of something. Restroom improvements at a park, and that was under 2012, 2013. So that, okay, we see that there was money allocated as a community project to fix the bathrooms at a certain park, and that was out of that community, that was out of your request back in Measure J Commission's 2012, 2013 calendar year. Was the money spent? Yes or no? What was the cost, the final cost? Or if it wasn't spent? Does that make sense? Is that kind of what?
Well, I'm thinking just for their sake, probably find that big spreadsheet. It will give you a very good start. And one of you two correct me if I'm wrong, but and this might help clarify what you're thinking about the community projects when we started. And yes, that's where a lot of the bulk of the first year and first 2 years came from. But staff recommendations kept creeping in. So what we finally said is okay, staff recommendations are starting to take more. We're not getting the community input. So that's when we asked them to pass a policy that we'd always have $1 million that is not to be invaded by staff recommendations. So that was probably 4 or 5 years ago.
It was,
The year
Yeah.
before I started.
Right.
so for the 2015, 18,
Yeah.
it was just prior to that.
Right.
And how was council at that time in regard to recommendations made by the commission?
Well, pretty much. There were a couple like the Taquash Creek, or Taquash Canyon,
It's Creek Master Plan.
The master plan.
not the master plan,
Oh,
the
the
median.
triangle part?
The
Oh,
median.
the median.
And it took us 3 times to represent that till they finally agreed to do it. But we kept to be persistent, and as it turned out, it was, the right thing.
Beautiful project.
Yeah.
And so it was,
So,
I think we
following
pushed
that
that
up,
under
I know that
water conservation.
there may be a lot of questions if you do this, and if it's possible, and I hate to do this in January, but I know John and I can't be at the next meeting, so your only source of information would be Christine if we do this in November.
But there's enough of a relationship that if in February, let's say, if we asked you to come back because we have questions.
Sure.
Will there be cake or cookies?
If it gets them back for help, I'll bring the cake and cookies. Well, and I think a lot of it too is for those of us who are newer, and I think it's, again, just kind of, when it's in a spreadsheet, it's pretty easy to figure out. And I've seen those, and I don't want you to recreate the wheel, because I know when we met, when I took over as chair, you had presented me some of those spreadsheets, so, and they made sense to me. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at, and just being able to go through it, see where we are, and I think we want to move on. I mean, we want to get this, we want to figure out what's holding up some of the areas of hotspots, how we can get it moving, and I'm sure we all want to get it behind us. We want to hopefully get these grants in, and we want to move on. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents, and let's have that on the agenda as old business.
And if I could just, before we leave that topic, I have every application for every project in the first group and the second group before we went to the police department, and they identified the worst of the worst traffic corridors in the city. And I think that those somehow, with all the notes associated with those projects, need to be part of this commission, so that you can go back and read the project request, and so.
Archives. Well,
You'll take those? Good, I'll prepare them for you.
Jim, can I get clarification? Now, when you're talking about you want to know how much was spent and allocated for projects, is the emphasis really the hotspots and the community projects?
well, I think everything that Measure J is a part of. I mean, community, it sounds like before hotspots, community projects might have gotten muddied down and put in with a lot of general fund. So I guess that could just be what you presented me, like everything from day one, excuse me, till now, that Measure J monies have been allocated to help pay for whatever, Bullards, different projects, and we've fed some money into that. So I think we need to see where we are with that, and and those monies are still out there or have been spent. And then hotspots is the first one that we've actually kind of kept track of very individually for all those different projects within the hotspots. So I think that's kind of an audit on its own to look at that, because obviously it's a community project that 5 years from now, hopefully we're not still talking about, that we've moved on and we're getting this stuff done. So I think it's just, again, we can look at this, and I know Christine has worked with Don a bit on it, but as a commission, it's good for all of us to say, all right, what's the deal with this? Is this a issue with the tribe because the sidewalk isn't being poured because it's tribal land? landowner, what can we do? Because a lot of it boils down to public safety, and we want to see it done. It's important. So, and then we also want to make sure, okay, if it's not being done, that we have that money to put forward towards. Exactly. So, and then that can be part of a new line item from Marla where it can show community project money that's available down the road. Okay, any public comment? All right, moving on, any staff member comments?
Regarding the December meeting, this room is not available for the 13th. The council chambers does seem to be available, however, the meeting would not be recorded.
Comments?
I'll check on availability. Well, there are standing meetings already, but I can check on the 12th.
If we can bounce around on that week maybe and just email us.
I can email you available dates in December and go from there.
And any thoughts while we're together if it looks like, well, 13th is probably the best and it won't be recorded? From other commissioners.
I think we need a meeting, so whether it's recorded or not, I think we need the meeting.
I will check available dates and email all of you and go from there.
Okay, thanks, Ariana. Any other comments, staff member comments? Okay. Any commission member comments?
I want to apologize for being late. I got mixed up on my calendar on the time.
And I did see a 3 o'clock and a 4 o'clock toggling there, so you're.
That's why I missed last month. I never changed it from Thursday. I was here. But it's the wrong day.
Okay.
So
Commissioner Hammond.
Yes, I just wanted to report that the One Palm Springs Code Enforcement and Public Works Subcommittee is currently working with the Palm Springs Police Department, asking for and looking at data for the second worst corridor in the city. And my expectation is that that will come to this group in the spring or a year from spring as a possible community project. And if it's at all possible to identify what that corridor is and have our engineering staff begin to look for grant money to pay for it, that it seems to be a really good return on investment for Measure J funds, to use them as matching funds for these kinds of grants. Plus, it's wonderful for the city to study corridors specifically and identify engineering and police improvements for those corridors. So, just a heads up.
Okay, any other comments? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay.